Tall Tales. The Nymph Symphony.
Chapters.
Chapter 26. Treason. Everyone was left kneeling, stiff as stone, watching the spot where Anera had vanished from, waiting for her to reappear. I was in complete denial about her being gone, expecting her to be the same daring escape artist I knew her to be, a resourceful girl capable of picking any shackle or lock and crawling her way back to us. So I stayed on the ground, naively waiting for her return, long after many others had already stood back up, wastefully allowing the clock to tick on when every second mattered more than the one before it. No one ever comes back once they've been taken, and everybody in that room knew it, but was too afraid to be the one to say it out loud. My ears were still ringing from my queen's loud ghostly scream, and my vision was still hazy from the pounding migraine it had delivered. But slowly I stumbled back to my feet, swaying a little, just like the rest of the people already standing. Some feeling those debilitating effects more than the others, as those nearest to the balcony were in direct line of the scream and were still virtually incapacitated. The prince was quite close to the left side of his mother when it had all happened, and as consequence, he was one of those who were worse off than the rest, battling his own failing feet as he struggled to pull himself up, and of all force. The genuine lack of movement and aid to help him throughout the dimming sun-spire chamber was evidence enough of just how truly shocked everyone was over what had just transpired, all of them looking as if they had already reached the same conclusion I had, and had no idea how our wrathful queen would soon react. Many of the noblemen kept to themselves as they helped each other up quietly, only to stand beside a frozen and expressionless queen, waiting for directions on what to do, no one daring to have a sense of free speech before Malena was to speak. We were all in dire need of somebody to speak, though, for anyone to simply shout out some hasty orders to follow, rather than wasting precious time and allowing the sky to dim, slowly descending this palace into a grim orange-colored darkness. "My lady," Zephyr gently said to the queen, trying to rouse her, wake her up from the frozen shock she was stuck within, as she stared towards the spot her daughter had vanished from. Malena was usually strung under the face of hardship, but this time was an exception. Even I was wishing for the queen to wake with rage, to be her ordinary self and take ruthless command, to scream and shout orders of frustration, to send another army into Kalios war, anything other than remaining stunned in silence like the woman we had before us. "Keep working," Malena finally vented toward Akoni and his fellow engineers, by the crystal on the floor, her eyes moving to the bright new crystal lying parallel to the old cracked one, her voice trembling with a raw yet rattled ferocity, much like she was holding them solely accountable for taking too long to repair the spire in the first place. She wiped away a trail of tears from her right cheek, only to turn away and look towards the windowless balcony instead in an attempt to hide her tears from others. The timid lesser technicians all got back to work after a moment, scheming on how best to erect the spire, only to stop and glimpse towards Akoni in further need for him to take lead while he stood there as still as a statue in wild thought. He had chosen to ignore her instructions. Akoni got up from the floor, turning to face his queen's back. She turned around and stared at him, no doubt waiting for him to explain why he wasn't following her immediate orders. "I said start moving," Malena snapped, sending a short screech reverberating through all of our heads as it bounced up and down the echoing chamber tower, her bark spooking everyone nearby, all but Akoni shaking in their boots upon her unsteady verbal command. "My queen," he initiated, "if we reinstall the spire and it eliminates all eclipses, what chance does Anera have of finding her way back to us?" he said to her. "We have half an hour at most before night sets on every rural town of the borderlands," she said bitterly to him, looking to the rest of us as everyone bowed their heads in a silent sorrow of acceptance and shame. Guilty feeling dignitaries all secretly thankful they weren't being asked to put their lives ahead of the princess. "She is gone," Malena then sobbed, a devastated tone more terrifying than she had ever shared to express with any one of us before. "Honey," Helios said, in approach towards his distraught wife. "I won't abandon my daughter," he dared to say, overruling her orders with his own. "They never come back," she repeated, aggravated by her family's unwillingness to accept her cold perception. "But How many times have we tried properly looking? Oconee defiantly questioned, loosening the grip of a wrench he held in gesture of humble protest. Where can we look? She criticized. In the darkness, he responded. You want darkness? Look outside, she stated, pointing towards the tower's balcony and its gradually dying sun. Our entire countryside is about to be overrun by night. How many might die for us to have this discussion? Just fix the spire, Oconee. That's an order, she said to him and before us all, revealing the very real threat of impending danger. Should that dusk settle over the lands and the carnivores of the night begin to return? Don't any of you get it? She continued. They took her so we would leave the spire off overnight, because overnight is all it'll take for us to lose everything we built, she explained, revealing the harshest truth of all. The fact is, we can't help her if our city is in just as much danger. As in truth, she made a very compelling point. I knew just how hard it was for her to have to choose between the life of her daughter or the preservation of our entire society. Dusk was indeed setting unsuspectingly on all of our towns, and Melina had very few minutes to do something about it before the borderlands would have its first full night in nearly 20 years. But that cost was too great for any one of us in her family to be willing to bear. Listen to me, boy. Until we have a better plan, I need you to reactivate the spire, she said passively-aggressively to Oconee, giving him barely a few seconds to think before she grabbed him by the collar of his nice suit jacket and shirt, not caring about all the dignitaries present to witness it, as they too nodded and silently cussed in agreement with her ruthless command. Just do it already, man, someone young and privileged called out in frustration from within the noble crowd. Oconee, we have no choice, said one of Oconee's fellow technician associates, trying to look out for his friend's immediate welfare. But as scared as Oconee was, he was adamant in standing his ground, doing what he thought was right and unwilling to abandon the hope of his princess coming back to him. Answer me this, he said to Melina as she held a firm grip upon his collar, beaming her most soulless death stare directly into his stubborn and unfaltering eyes. How will we negotiate with the gnolls if you close the very bridge they need to communicate with us? He said, speaking surprisingly calm and clearly, without any of his usual shy stutters. The crowd looked skeptical but didn't seem to care about anything other than what Melina wanted to do. Very few of them seemed sure about whether they should be supporting or condemning Oconee over his resilience. He was the only one with enough brains to ask those questions, and the only one impervious to harm, seeing as only he and his reluctant father knew precisely how to reinstall the Sunspire crystals. That meant Melina had no immediate threat she could use to control him, other than shallow intermediation tactics, used in bluff to try and force him to cooperate, which begs the question, to who exactly we would even be negotiating with, my queen? Oconee then dared to ask, looking her dead in the eyes, suddenly sure with himself that she knew more than what she was letting on. Your father, she bickered. Who else? She said. No, mother, called out Arlo, shaking his head to a daze as he stumbled over to assist his friend. Despite the temporary head trauma he seemed to be steadily dealing with still. He's locked down in the dungeons at your request, watched over by at least a dozen of our best guards who have raised no such alarm, Arlo confirmed, just as skeptical. Then it's one of his lieutenants, she sniped quickly. You mean those old feeble men who clearly never had a day of combat experience? Arlo debated before her and the crowd. What are you not telling us about the gnolls? He continued to press, moving between Oconee and his mother, blocking the path as he forced her hand to lower enough to let go of Oconee altogether. Every potential threat in this world has been neutralized, he rebelled. What is outside of this world that you're not telling us? He speculated, maintaining the military mindset he had always had when it came to never leading another member behind, let alone his very own sister. The queen ignored his question before the eager crowd, though. Men and women of all different types were beginning to drift away from each other, dividing up by their loyalties. The lesser ranks looking to nobles like Sapphire and Ebony for a means of closure beside their queen. The vast majority of soldiers and council leaders eventually appearing to unanimously back their queen over their future king in a sudden but surprising turn of events. The anxious crowd was sticking with their queen despite wondering whether an undiagnosed madness had suddenly progressed within Arlo and Oconee this time around. Midas's rambles of ghosts and demons seeming all too realistic to simply pretend they were just fictitious lies, meaning members of this room had no choice but to follow someone based on their need to survive. "What is wrong with you both?" Melina erupted, stepping away from both of them, only to face all members of the crowd. "They are at our doorstep," she proclaimed. "What they are doesn't matter when they are already breaching our walls." She pointed towards the balcony once again. "This entire city will be overrun if daylight doesn't repel them away." The crowd seemed to be carefully listening to her words. Her husband, the king, eventually dropped his own skeptical resolve in guilty acceptance of such a harsh and undeniable truth. "Akoni, let's just do it. Reset the spire," the king said to his protege and friend. Akoni scanned the room, looking for anyone to offer a counter-argument. All but Arlo and myself were no longer willing to look him back in the eyes as the rest of the crowd stared at the ground. "No," Akoni said. "Okay, grab him," stated the queen. The other technicians whispered to one another, only to see 2 engineers on either side of him stand and grab hold of both his shoulders. "Let him go," Arlo then demanded, looking both of them dead in the eyes. Both of those men scared but refusing to do so, while a whole crowd advanced towards the 2 of them, preventing either of them from backing away. "Last chance," the queen warned, both the civilian militia and military to either side. "Reinstall that crystal," she stubbornly directed, pointing towards the underlying maintenance trench latch where the gold and silver framed orb structure hanged over. "I won't," he stated. "You will," she demanded. "Not until we know more," he said, dropping his tool belt and wrist bracer to the ground as both a form of surrendering disarmament and dramatic objection. "Take him to his father," she instructed. "If one of them fixes it, then maybe one of them will get to live," she decreed. "Whoa, calm down. On what grounds?" Arlo asked quickly in concern, leaping forward to block the route of incoming guards handing over Akoni from the technicians that still currently held him. "Treason," she replied, staring her son in the eyes. The guards dared to then push the prince aside, but stopped as he pushed back with an even rougher and more ferocious resolve. "Step away, Arlo," Zephyr ordered the prince, drawing his bow straight up towards Akoni's middle mass while his noble friend blocked the arrow's flight path. The civilians, like me, were all scared stiff, merely waiting for a subtle breeze to erupt the room and allow pure chaos to commence. The prince raised his glossy clear sword from his back, the light of the orange sun reflecting onto his crimson-glowing narrow blade. "Okay, that's enough," the queen roared, her words echoing throughout the chamber, quaking the ground again and sending everyone to their knees in agony. Pushing her son aside and grabbing Akoni herself throughout the aftermath of her screeching torment. The voice was like a vice compressing my head as she continued to shriek each time someone tried to move from the floor, torturing everyone but herself as she dragged Akoni towards the stairs. But then that voice sharply stopped. Melena's own shadow had tackled her and was currently smothering her mouth from screeching as she was kept momentarily pinned down to the floor. Everyone looked immediately to me, even though no one was more shocked or scared than I was by the shadow's sudden appearance. All I'd wanted was the pain to stop, but given my relationship to all those involved, it appeared as if I had just stated where exactly my own loyalties truly laid. All but my close friends appeared ready to converge on me. I got to my feet and timidly backed away towards the wall. Melina exploded her way out of that apparition with a strong volcanic burst of sound, a remnant and presence of my protector puffing away in a figureless puff cloud of shade. The well-mannered obsidian knight I'd spoken to on the bench was suddenly 3 feet away from me, the first to raise a sword of solid frosty black eyes in careful approach towards me. I looked around the room for help. Arlo had chosen to abandon Akoni as he came protectively towards me, his sword striking his old training partner as he managed to flick a small spinning kick into the man's abdomen and push himself directly away from me. "Bring me my son," Melina ordered as she continued to drag Akoni down the stairs, forcefully in the exit of the chamber floor. "And kill her," she wickedly shouted, the pure hatred in her voice elevating my already trembling heart. I couldn't even dream to describe my light-headed flood of feelings upon hearing her say that towards me. My eyes widened to a point of pure white blindness. I was completely out of focus, as if time had slowed and my whole world had already gone dark. It was a chamber full of hostile and enraged strangers who were suddenly facing me as if I were a monster in need of slaying. The looks on their faces made me feel as if I had fallen onto a dinner plate of starving siren cannibals. As for that second, and that second alone, I had no doubt in my mind that it would be the end of me. Despite all I had learned in my week's travel, I was back to being a helpless damsel all over again. I was in too much panic to raise my fists and try to fight. Too much to be any use at all, as Arlo attempted to protect me from arrows and curved little black knives that were being hurled around him and aimed to hit me along the sidelines. Arlo was my only friend in the room, catching arrowheads that slowed as they came towards me, all of them launched towards my head and chest by Sapphire in ludicrous rapid fire. "Wait, please don't," I begged towards the crowd as they continued to persistently advance towards us. My pleas falling on deaf ears as this remorseless group were pushing us further towards the sky and open balcony overhang, the space we shared becoming too small for any proper form of continued deflective combat. The two of us were only a shy prod away from tumbling over the low-level rails and plunging down the many elevated stories of the castle's inner walls, towards the concrete front steps, near the marketplace. A fleet of bolts and daggers flew towards us from the back of the crowd, the prince using his sound talents each time to slow those sharp instruments down, carefully flicking them away towards the walls and ledge with the edge of his glossy crystal sword. "Son, walk away from her now, or you walk away from everything," Helios threatened, moving before the front of the crowd, acting the part of a worried father, the prince actively lowering his sword in a surrendering response, only to look behind himself towards me and the ledge, with the very same fear-stained stare he'd given me when we were in the well during the swamp ambush of Ambervale. I nodded acceptingly of the horror I knew he was considering, holding my breath and bracing myself for a long, scary jump and fall. "Arlo, don't!" Helios muttered, more afraid than I was when he realized what Arlo was thinking. "Leave with her and you'll never be king," he managed to spit out, only for his son to dive and leap us over the balcony together, escaping the volley of sharp projectiles thrown at my head before we began our treacherous freefall. Air dramatically cooled like frost as the downforce of high-pressure wind blew against our eyes and face. We had in essence traded one horrible fate for another, falling much faster than the slowly descending sun as we moved in between the shaded pockets of the eastern bell tower and the old northern lighthouse that hanged off the cliff face. We came to an abrupt mid-tower stop when Arlo stabbed his sharp crystal sword into the castle's wall, the blade slicing through the stone like cloth, only to eventually slow down under the friction as all but the hills sparked and glowed red with the crackling fury of lightning and fire. Heat friction eventually cooling and stopping us near halfway down the ludicrously high tower spire. My grip slipped from the impact of the stop as his sweaty shoulders and arms caused me to slip away, only to be caught in the nick of time by his quickly lowered, loose left-hand grip. "Just hold on," he shouted ironically as he held my wrist too tight for me to move it and do the same with his. Both of us stuck insanely high up from the concrete-paved market square below, stranded upon the inner city wall above one of 4 tall corner towers, neither a ledge or window in sight for us to escape through. Our only choice was to keep holding on and wait for something or someone out there to arrive and save us. "You wouldn't happen to have any ideas?" Arlo asked worryingly, admitting this was as far as he had thought his plan through as I battled to reaffirm another hand for grip against the bottom of his ankle, feeling as if I had no grip at all, but was merely glued on just by the sweat of my palm. "No," I said in cower, only to notice we were right in between the nodes of sun and tower shadow as it slithered like tiny worms in weight of me. "Maybe just let go." Arlo looked down at me, deciding whether or not to trust me about losing his sword and grip to another terrifying freefall. It was a lot to ask of him, and it meant taking his trust in me to a whole new level, one I wasn't even particularly confident with, considering the speed of how quickly we'd fall. The chances of those worms becoming a clouded net large and dense enough to catch us without simply going through it were slim to nil. "Are you sure?" He then yelled down, a whimper in his tone too, as he saw exactly what insane feat I was intending to accomplish. "Not really," I admitted in full scared confession, my biggest difficulty being how best to judge the exact speed of our fall to match the catching speed of a cloudy impermeable hook and net just below us. "But are you ready?" He then whimpered to his own scared concern. "I've changed my mind. I don't think I can do it, Arlo," I shouted up to him while I dangled, looking at my feet and the huge drop towards flat concrete below. "Then don't think it. Just do it, okay?" he stated, only to swallow his breath deeply and look away as he faced his own fears, pulling us up slightly higher only to let the sword go altogether. I was so scared I couldn't see straight. We had fallen straight into a web of blackness I had made, a dark black blanket of blindness cloaking over us as we landed squarely on top of a quickly devised warp bed of scaly shadows that then immediately ripped and frayed apart into feathers upon our landing. Struck too hard by the intense downforce of wind and gravity that came down along with us. The impact made upon my failed cloud net was far too heavy and the shadows far too weak and flimsy to be able to both catch and successfully restrain us. Instead, our landing was so forceful that every hook fitted into the war-torn crevices of the stone walls I had made were pushed out from their wormy burrows and forced us to continue free-falling down in one huge unseen blob bubble of slowly evaporating shade. It was futile of myself to have even tried to attempt it. There simply was no worm-like pin or brambly thorn I could physically manifest with the amount of resource needed to have been able to make something solid enough to sink into the brisk dusk wall, nor a tentacle or pad of suction that could stick us or it as we fell right past all guard windows of the city walls upon the carpet cloud net I had melded. However, thinking quick on my feet, I and the wind were working together at spreading my shadows and stretching the blanket thinner and lighter upon our giant fall. Like a parachute box in the making, this time, we were sitting on top of the sail rather than hanging off one from underneath. I felt like we were slowing down as we dropped towards the floor, gliding and ballooning just like the crazy spiders that were rumored to be able to fly under silk lines. I had truly pushed my limits as I kept my mind solely focused on flattening the blob in all its clumpy fat areas and spanning out the sides like bugs' wings, pushing the feathery sheet further and further apart from each end as I did so. My hands were ruffling the bulk of what we sat, grooming and flexing it out until it was sufficient enough to catch and sail in the wind and drift us over the long connective alley streets downwards from Market Square. I had granted myself a whole new lease on life upon the realization we could sail above all of the dangers below us. Together we soared, feeling just a floating pollen debris found out in northern grass fields just above the walls and beyond the hinterlands outside of our sight. The wind blew in our ears almost refreshingly as our descent slowed. Arlo was still clueless of what I was doing while he remained covering his eyes in terror of my failed net idea. "You can look up," I said in a proud gloat. The wind was finally soft enough for us to be able to hear each other clearly. His reaction, though, was less of gratitude and more of panic as he looked all around, pointing downwards and highlighting the source of frantic war horns and soldiers being called to arms. "Can we go faster?" he shouted. As for my magic carpet to fluttering moth in the sky, my prince and I continued to glide downwards towards flat paved concrete, and the profound gray growing smudges of incoming infantry members already moving out onto the streets and merging as one unanimous witch-hunting crowd. Doors were being busted open, full of fresh and shiny unified recruits coming out in mass numbers, marching in one prepared chase to catch us wherever we landed. Arrows shot from the high walls towards us as those below came in like a flood that washed across the upcoming sandy pavement and streets, cutting off all immediate safe areas we could potentially have descended upon. It was a real unavoidable problem, as I had no ability to regain our dropping altitude, and, regardless of where we were to land, infantry soldiers were inevitably going to be there mere moments upon our eventual landing. I watched them all fan out to cover up as much area as possible. Each diagonal swivel we made changed our direction as we virtually did circles around the Market Square and inner city district. I had no choice but to swoop us down quickly to dodge bullets being fired from a skilled crossbow marksman hidden in his shop stall below us. The sight of each junior soldier's face becoming distinguished within the clustering crowds as we near crashed on top of them before pulling up and veering downhill towards the lower outer street suburbs, somehow managing to utilize the furious speed of the drop to rise over a few small and flat upcoming housing estates. We felt helpless and terrified. The wings themselves were fading, as they had expanded too far out to be sucked back up or controlled, spreading from the size of huge moths to that of the blood-sucking bats that prey on them. We started swinging and swaying left and then right off balance as we dodged roofing, only just managing to stay up the downhill descent while crashing towards the drains, caverns and south sandstone walls of our city's end. I knew very little about flight avionics. Akuni had made it look so much easier than it was upon my first trial at it. One would imagine there was nothing at all to hit when you're in the free air up above. But nothing could have felt further from the truth. Fact was, all you ever seemed to do was turn and dodge things coming in an immediate collision course towards you. Luckily for us, though, I had done a sufficient enough job at saving Arlo and me from all incoming perils, and had quite serendipitously also amplified our speed at the cost of losing most control in order to safely distance us from soldiers and civilian armada that were in pursuit of our long-winged black sail. For that moment, we were safe, but we had very little time to land before the light of dusk fried up too much of our wings' edges, and left the cloud so soft and thin we would fall right through it. I had managed to find an area to land from, just above the side alley streets, by the poorer low-level side of town, passing over multiple rows of closed shops and stalls on our way towards the underground irrigation bunker tunnels that made up the castle's intricate catacombs. Ready or not, I chose to wrap the wings around us both as we shot and crashed into a stockpile of fruit barrels in an abandoned street wagon, smashing into them destructively, despite the low-powered pillow cannon our furious crash landing felt to us. The prince was first to find which way was topside, after drooling on himself, realizing which way gravity was pushing amidst a murder scene of splintered wood and dark juice stains we had found ourselves splattered within. He pulled me up and out of the wagon we had smashed and broken, getting up on the angle due to fracturing of the right wheel upon our impact with it. He grabbed my hand in a hurry as he attempted to lead us away as quickly as possible, the two of us leaving one bloody massacre of red and blueberry stains across our clothes, face, and skin, red raspberries resembling the sight of dripping blood as we were quick to flee the crash site before licking the back of our hands and realizing that for ourselves. Upon our escape, I finally got a stray moment to wonder what kind of new evil I had found myself in the middle of. Obviously, there had been some serious lies told and covered up by the nobles. I wondered while he dragged me to safety how much Arlo might have known about what was actually going on, whether I should even be trusting him. After all, everything his mother ever taught him involved some form of power play, and whatever it was nobles were hiding, the queen herself had become dangerously engulfed in the very middle of it. Milena had been manipulating an entire closed-off society with propaganda that was clearly corruptive and all-consuming. For her to abandon her daughter and make her son an outcast and villain in every villager's eyes was not something that was going to be related to a deceit that was either small or trivial. There was a big secret yet to be revealed, and clearly one only Midas was brave enough to try and reveal before his exile. When Arlo and I ducked behind posts and watched the soldiers in the street pass us, I could see in their eyes a certain form of disgust. They were hunting us with hatred, as if we were the new gnolls in need of disembowelment. But we weren't gnolls. We were just rebellious survivalists who had become anarchists and traitors to them. We moved swiftly and silently through the outer city, street-side alleys. We were blocked upon all fronts, merely waiting for the soldiers to eventually track us down. The prince and I had to keep deathly quiet as we stuck to the darkness and its corners, finding an empty old broken wood window to step through, hiding while the soldiers and village militias, with pitchforks and torches, worked together in hunt of us. Hardly the same locals I had bought clothes and bread from just a short week ago. "We need to find Camilla," I whispered to Arlo. "She won't risk treason to help you," Arlo whispered back. "Midas told me she was the key," I said, a name spoken out loud that filled Arlo with almost immediate regret. "Kaya, I'm going to get you to safety, but I'm not helping you betray my family," he declared. "We need to get you out of the capital now," he stated while forcefully yanking my arm and ducking me down below the window ledge inside the dark pottery-filled room. I waited for more nymphs to pass by the window before saying, "No, what we need to do is save Nera," I insisted, more determined than ever to find out the truth and use it to save the day. "How? Do you have a plan, or are you just going to keep winging it?" he scolded. "'Cause that's working out so well for you right now," he then uttered, taking a small chance to peer outside and scout for the bright torches of the villagers amidst the blue darkening chaos of quickly approaching night. "No, but that's why I need to see Camilla." "I'm telling you, she won't help us," he repeated. "Her son and husband have been taken hostage," I persisted. "She will want to help us. Arlo, you and I can save Nera, if you trust me." He looked at me with deep consideration, opening his mouth to speak, just as a loud wrecking ball collision struck and bounced him into the side wall. A living moving stone boulder uncurling out from a ball as Odie stood before us, scared that he'd accidentally killed his prince in a blind roll downhill, only to turn and look to me unsurely, as if he were trying to recall what he was supposed to do upon actually finding us. He seemed to remember and began approaching me with ominous squinting eyes. "No, Odie, wait, wait!" I shrieked in a scared whisper, the sound of his crash no doubt grabbing the attention of all outside, who had come to inspect the damage. I raised my hands up in surrender, keeping them open in a peaceful advancing approach while still trying to keep myself away from the view of the above windowsill. He paused, hesitating from action as he stood there with his smiley, smooth gnome baby face. "I need your help, Odie. Will you help me find Camila?" I said to him, scared but hopeful he would trust me, considering all the time we'd spent together when we were children. "Remember back to when we used to play hide and seek? It'll be just like that," I added, making him smile, grateful that he remembered me and was simply too innocent to be enslaved by the propaganda of Melina and her insidious command. He nodded his head and curled back into his rolling pinball, as with a final kick of both legs, he pushed and dived through the back walls of the pottery shop, loudly crashing himself into each connected neighboring brick housing flat thereafter. He had already plowed his way through a long series of cheap estates, making a long series of small man-sized circular crawling holes for us to pursue after him. Arlo and I had found a way to move off the streets and out of sight, the prince sluggishly trying to keep up with me as we took the most physically direct downhill path towards the storm water gates and undercity chasms we knew we would be our best chance of escape within. Eventually, we ended up outside of the houses and back onto the flat, open alley streets for the final stretch towards the high stone city walls. Most volunteer village soldiers were looking up at the moon with terror, only to see us appear back before the streets. Many of them lucky to have been just out of the way of Odie, before Arlo and me wonkily continued to bolt downhill from beside them, together running the straight-line gauntlet, following in the aftermath of Odie's downhill tumble as he blasted through the city's stormwater drains at the edge of the walls. There was a small warping bend in the bars of one drainage gate upon Odie's heavy hull puncture, as he had already descended into the dark spider undercity of our capital. All we had to do was get to it. Folk were quick to chase us after the sounds of the gate's bars spilling apart. Arrows were stuffed with dried leaf matter and ignited before being fired at me from the highest perch of the flat housing roofs we came out from, while Zephyr jumped in charge of all his fellow leaping archers. The marksmen were taking shots from all angles, just as shards of spiky dark icicles were being hurled like glacial spikes towards us from the sidelines of one reconvening alley lane. Thrown by the obsidian knight as he slid and skated downhill on a rapidly approaching intersect path with us, the obsidian knight lived to regret that choice, as Arlo merely turned, planted his foot and shoulder, and charged him through a wall, before running again in an attempt to catch back up with me and the last-minute dash we undertook, as we headed towards the irrigation tunnels at the southwestern wall of the castle. I sprouted tiny mushrooms along the ground wherever I leaped, using their bouncy caps like miniature trampolines on the road to help me accelerate and jump over patriotic villagers who thrusted their homemade spears forwards in an attempt to block my approach. In addition, I also materialized a couple of their shadows to grab and pull them down as they attempted to re-pursue, the only things I could do while trying to maintain our breathless chase of Odie. Unable to follow Odie's exact path, he had made puncture holes through a small cluster of carts before the gates, blasting multiple barrels stashed in that corner into splintered fragments that littered the pavement and grass, creating a blockage too rough and risky for me to humbly go over. Instead, I had to end my run with one last giant mushroom sprout that burst with spores as I struck against it, flying me over the sharp debris as I landed and rolled in one diving bolt onto the grass just before the wall and after the rubble. Unstoppable, as I slid sideways against the cold dew of cut lawn as I slipped all the distance needed, until precisely falling in between the gap of 4 broken and bent bars that Odie had made on his axis into the stormwater flow-through tunnels, first to splash into a deep but motionless man-made stormwater trench, followed shortly after by the loud crash of Arlo, who recklessly charged through the busted wooden fragments scattered about, only to dive through the sewer entrance bars head first and fall into the same run-off waterway ditch that I had also splashed into.